Is the United States in a new space race with China? It's no secret that the US and China are staunch rivals in the space sector, but are we really witnessing a new space race? Headlines proclaiming the rise of a new space race between the US and China have become common in news coverage following many of the exciting launches in recent years. Experts have pointed to China's rapid advancements in space as evidence of an emerging landscape where China is directly competing with the US for supremacy in space. This idea of a space race between China and the US sounds convincing given the broader narrative of China's rise, but how accurate is it? As a professor who studies space and international relations, the author says, "My research aims to quantify the power and capabilities of different nations in space. When I look at various capacities, the data paints a much more complex picture than a tight space race between the US and China. At least for now, the reality looks more like what I call a complex hegemony. One state, the US, is still dominating the key space capabilities, and this lead is further amplified by a strong network of partners, of course. A clear leader makes for a boring race. Calling the current situation a race implies that the US and China have roughly equal capabilities in space, but in several key areas the US is far ahead not only of China, but of all other spacefaring nations combined. Starting with spending, and in 2021 the US space budget was roughly US $59.8 billion. China has been investing heavily in space and rocket technology over the last decade and has doubled its spending in the last 5 years, but with an estimated budget of $16.18 billion in 2021, it's still spending less than a third of the US budget. The US also leads significantly in the number of active satellites. Currently, there are 5,465 total operating satellites in orbit around Earth. The US operates 3,433, or 63% of these. In contrast, China has 541. Similarly, the US has more active spaceports than China, with 7 operational launch sites at home and abroad, and at least 13 additional spaceports in development. The US has more options to launch payloads into various orbits. In contrast, China only has 4 operational spaceports, with 2 more planned, all located within its own territory. Parity with nuance. While the US may have a clear advantage over China in many areas of space, in some measures the differences between the two countries are more nuanced. In 2021, for instance, China attempted 55 orbital launches, 4 more than the US's 51. The total numbers may be similar, but the rockets carry very different payloads to orbit. The vast majority, 84%, of Chinese launches had government or military payloads intended mostly for electronic intelligence and optical imaging. Meanwhile, the US's 61% of launches were for non-military, academic, or commercial use, predominantly for Earth observation or telecommunications. Space stations are another area where there are important differences hiding beneath the surface. Since the 1990s, the US has worked with 14 other nations, including Russia, to operate the International Space Station. The ISS is quite large, with 16 modules, and has driven technological and scientific breakthroughs. But the ISS is now 24 years old, and participating nations are planning to retire it in 2030. The Chinese Tiangong Space Station is a new kid on the block. Construction was only completed in late 2022, and it's much smaller, with only 3 modules. China has built and launched all the different parts and remains the sole operator of the station, despite having invited others to join. China is undoubtedly expanding its space capabilities, and in a report published August 2022, the Pentagon predicted that China would surpass US capabilities in space as early as 2045. However, it's unlikely that the US will remain stagnant as it continues to increase funding for space. A major point of difference between US and China is the nature and number of international collaborations. For decades, NASA has been fruitfully cultivating international commercial partnerships in everything from developing specific space technologies to flying humans into space. The U.S. government has also signed 169 space data sharing agreements with 33 states and intergovernmental organizations, 129 with commercial partners, and 7 with academic institutions. China also has allies that help with space, most notably Russia and members of the Asia-Pacific Space Cooperation Organization, including Iran, Pakistan, Thailand, and Turkey. China's collaborators are, however, fewer in number and have far less developed space capabilities. Efforts to return to the surface of the moon excellently highlighted this difference in ally support and synergy. Both the US and China have plans to send people to the surface of the moon and to establish lunar bases in the near future. These competing lunar aims are often cited as evidence of the space race, but they are very different in terms of partnerships and scope. In 2019, Russia and China agreed to jointly go to the moon in 2028. Russia is contributing its lunar landers and Oriole crewed orbiters, while China is improving its Chang robotic spacecraft. Their future International Lunar Research Station is open to all interested parties and international partners, but to date, no additional countries have committed to the Chinese and Russian effort. In contrast, since 2020, 24 nations have joined the US-led Artemis Accord. This international agreement outlines shared principles of cooperation for future space activity, and through the Artemis program, specifically aims to return people to the moon by 2025 and establish a moon base and lunar space station soon after. In addition to the broad international participation, the Artemis program has contracted with a staggering number of private companies to develop a range of technologies, from lunar landers to lunar construction methods and more. China is not the only game in town. While China may seem like the main competitor of the US in space, other countries have space capabilities and aspirations that rival those of China. India spends billions on space and plans to return to the moon, possibly with Japan in the near future. South Korea, Israel, Japan, United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Germany, and European Union are also planning independent lunar missions. Japan has developed impressive technological space capabilities, including rendezvous proximity technology, to send a spacecraft to an asteroid and bring samples back to Earth that rival, even surpass, those of China. In the past, the space race was about who could reach the stars first and return home. Today, the goal has shifted to surviving and even thriving in the harsh environment of space. I believe it's not surprising that despite its decisive lead, the US has partnered with others to go to the moon and beyond. China is doing the same thing, but on a smaller scale. The picture that emerges is not of a race, but of a complex system with the US as a leader, working closely with extensive networks of partners. This is by Sveta Ben-Itzhak, Assistant Professor, Space International Relations at Air University. This is from the Creative Commons, from the conversation on Unexplained Mysteries. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.